And this panel is Belonging as an Act of Justice, Reimagining Homelessness through the lens of Dr. King's beloved community with Terence Lester. Terence Lester is a PhD candidate and founder of the nonprofit organization Love Beyond Walls, which strives to raise awareness and provide aid for those experiencing homelessness. He also created the Dignity Museum, the first museum in the United States dedicated to representing homelessness. His seventh book, All God's Children: How Confronting Buried History Can Build Racial Solidarity, is set to release in June. Please welcome Terence Lester.
How's it going, everyone? I'm excited to be here for a number of reasons. Firstly, I have to shout out my family. My wife, my son, and my daughter are here. They're my best friends, right? The reason being is because 8 months ago, I was in a near-fatal car accident, and I crushed both my hip and my pelvis. The doctor said I wouldn't be able to walk again, and it was my family's strength that got me through. Yeah. The first time I learned about hostile architecture, I was 17 years old. The brake booster had just gone out on my 1981 baby blue box Chevy. So my mother encouraged me to call my grandfather, Carlton York, a mechanic, to see if he could help me fix it. He invited me over and he taught me two important lessons that I'll never forget. The first was he wasn't going to fix the car for me. He told me to grab a tool from the toolbox and he'd fix it with me. I remember walking over to a rusty toolbox and grabbed the wrench amongst tools that looked like they had traveled through generations. Not knowing if I grabbed the right tool, he spoke up and told me that searching was a sign of learning. The second lesson came when I told him that I didn't think I would be able to fix the car because I didn't understand the tools. That was his opportunity to teach me a history lesson. My grandfather had a way of turning a car into a classroom. He told me he had grown up in the Jim Crow South and how every single day he had to fight hard laws and buildings designed to remind black people, you don't belong here. Now, my grandfather wasn't telling me this because he didn't think I could help fixing his car or this car. He was teaching me that everything he had to overcome was so that I could fix it. He was reminding me of how there was a hostile world out there and that did everything it could to remind him and my family and those stained with the pain of racial hatred that we weren't worthy or we didn't have the opportunity to fit in. He said this type of hostile architecture that he faced, that my grandmother faced, was when water fountains reminded him and our family that they weren't welcome. It was when signs on buses or signs in restaurant windows reminded him and my grandmother that they had to wait or enter from the back and that somehow they were not welcome. He told me that public sanitation had always been at the core of what it meant to be excluded and to keep people that looked like him and I thinking that to belong or achieve or to pursue anything beyond our sphere was impossible. This was the type of hostile architecture that acted as a violent reminder that home for some did not mean home for many. This was the first time I'd ever heard what the lack of belonging in society looked and felt like while looking in my grandfather's aging eyes. But sitting in that 1981 box Chevy, my grandfather told me that I belonged to a larger community, a beloved community. He taught me that belonging is about value, and value had everything to do with the inherent worth and value that I possessed, that we all possessed. He reminded me that in 1957, Martin Luther King Jr. stood at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in a pulpit and spoke these words when King said, the end of, or the result of nonviolence is redemption and reconciliation, but the purpose of nonviolence is a creation of the beloved community. You see, my grandfather taught me that I belonged to a community that was much bigger than one defined by hatred, the beloved community. You see, King's idea of the shared beloved community was a society where all members of society was valued and included, and where justice and peace prevail. You see, my grandfather and his conversation with me landed me in a PhD program studying public policy, researching how public policy has been used for centuries to define the worth and value of those who are poor and unhoused in this country, but specifically those who are unhoused. I've spent the past years researching the 5 periods of homelessness in U.S. history and how social and political rhetoric over years moved homelessness itself from a social issue to a criminal one. 40 plus years of criminalizing public policy that has connected homelessness to the criminal justice system and has been a direct attack on the sense of belonging for those who do not have an address. My research had me grappling with these questions. How did we get here? Why is it that when a person hears the word homelessness, why do they automatically think of 2 things? Drugs and mental health issues. 40 plus years of public policy shaping societal views on homelessness, determining who's deemed worthy and deserving and who is not, which has led to harmful narratives that keep those without a permanent address from being fully accepted into a more beloved community. All this helped me understand that there are 3 constructions of why people believe that poor people or unhoused people end up in the state of poverty. As defined by Teresa Gowan, she's a sociologist. She says there's 3 constructives or 3 main narratives that people tend to lean towards when talking about the poor and the unhoused. It's sin talk, sick talk, and system talk. This narrative, sin talk, where people believe that the poor or the unhoused somehow are morally wrong or lack character, and their failed moral center demands us to punish them. Sick talk, it's this narrative when people attempt to explain away the poor by suggesting that it's a lack of wellness that has caused them to be where they are. And to deal with this lack of wellness, we must exclude them. System talk, this idea or narrative where people understand that systemic issues causes people to end up unhoused. And I was fascinated by Gowan's 3 constructions of poverty because each category had punishment and exclusion as the way to addressing the issue. And because these narratives fuel the social framing of those who are unhoused, my research led me to develop 3 research questions that in turn led me to the state of Tennessee. How does public policy impact the sense of self-worth of those who are unhoused? Does the unhoused in the United States of America have a critical analysis of public policy? And how do harmful policies keep unhoused people from being a part of ML King's beloved community? This research landed me in the state of Tennessee, where I took my dissertation and I said that I was going to turn my whole dissertation into a documentary film. I lived on the streets in the state of Tennessee, and I traveled to the cities of Memphis and Knoxville and Nashville and Chattanooga, and I lived on the streets doing ethnographic research with those who were unhoused, because the state of Tennessee is the first state in the country to make sleeping outside a Class E felony, which comes with a felony charge and up to 6 years in prison and a loss of voting rights. And when you have a felony charge, it is harder to get a job and get access to housing. You see, I chose to focus on this state to center the voices of those who have been excluded from community. And when I landed in Tennessee, I saw a different type of hostile architecture, as my grandfather had saw. I saw urban design that sought to visibly erase the poor from the public eye. I saw hostile architecture that was not just against a race of people, but now against a social class. And it made me think about the intersection of race and class and how at the foundation of hostile architecture is this idea of erasure. You see, because erasure itself is always a threat to belonging, because belonging is about visibility. To be seen, to be heard is a powerful reminder that we are here and that we are human. And hostile architecture then and now is always about public sanitation and never about the visibility of those who are worthy. I'm talking about spikes and fences and boulders and signs littered across cities to remind those who are poor and unhoused that they do not belong, especially if you don't have an address. You see, when homelessness is criminalized, often individuals are seen as criminal instead of people who are in need of assistance, which can lead to further marginalization and exclusion from larger society. This dehumanization further perpetuates the cycle of poverty, homelessness, criminalization, making it even harder for people to find stability and access the support they need to rebuild their lives. And the reason I say to rebuild their lives is because belonging is important, and it's at the center of rebuilding your life. Because in order to rebuild somewhere, you must belong somewhere. Speaking with the unhoused in the state of Tennessee, while conducting these street interviews, I discovered that home is about where you feel seen and accepted and are able to develop meaningful relationship. It's a place where you feel like you are a part of a beloved community, while homelessness itself is about the lack of physical space. I remember seeing how affordable housing wasn't so affordable, even for those who have jobs. I remember speaking to a brother named Howard, a brother who used to live underneath a bridge in the heart of Nashville, who went from living under a bridge to owning his own apartment and doing advocacy work for those who are without an address. And I remember him telling me that affordability is not affordable when you're unhoused. This caused me to realize that the state that created this law to make it illegal to sleep outside had less beds than more and more people who are actually unhoused in the cities across this state. And instead of creating more space, these cities created more laws to take one's ability to belong. You see, the more I traveled and the more I heard the stories from those who are living on the streets, they went counter to the idea of King's beloved community. This beloved community that invokes interconnectedness and interrelatedness and interdependence. And it's all about this idea and concept of home and seeing our world as a shared address. It's about the type of home where all people are welcome, and this is the type of belonging that is an act of justice. My research led me on a quest to figure out how could I center the voices of the unhoused in a way that gives them an opportunity to reclaim their place in MLK's beloved community. And that has been through the power of voice. Through counter narratives, I found that people experiencing homelessness can tell their own stories, humanizing themselves and finding belonging by finding and using their own sense of voice. Because who are we to write policies that have real-time effects for those without houses, without including stakeholders and those who are unhoused in the conversations of these policies that have been designed? Who are we to believe the narratives about those we have never seen or never had a chance to meet? You see, when we extend belonging to those who are experiencing homelessness, we are working towards creating a society where all members are valued and included, because belonging is about voice. So I had this idea. I had an idea to create a museum that combats the stereotypes and social constructions that frame this community as not being worthy or being a part of community. I turned a shipping container into a traveling museum. The first museum in the United States of America that represents the subject of homelessness housed in a shipping container. And the reason I chose a shipping container because a shipping container has a powerful metaphor. Every shipping container has a story of origin, and every shipping container carries things of substance and value, and every shipping container moves around from place to place. And it's just like the experience of homelessness. Every person has a story of origin. People move around from place to place, but it does not mean that they don't have worth and value on the inside. We've had all types of visitors. We launched in 2019 and have had over 10,000 visitors. We've had public policy makers. We've had police officers and K through 12 students and educators and college students and corporations and even real estate agents and a whole spectrum of individuals who've chosen to come and immerse themselves to learn about how do we show up in a world and extend more belonging and empathy to a population of people that is oftentimes excluded. You see, this space allows people to belong to a narrative that is much bigger than the narratives that we have been used to labeling and limiting those who are unhoused. This museum houses the oral history of people who have journeyed through living underneath bridges and sleeping in tents and having to endure the coldest parts of the year with no warmth. It gives voice to those who are living out of their cars because their families can no longer afford the rent in their neighborhood because the rent has gone up. It gives voice to those who have been laid off their jobs and trying to find a way to struggle without making a living wage. So tonight, I want to end with this. We might think that belonging is small, but belonging is not small because belonging is an act of justice because it acknowledges the inherent worth and dignity of every individual. Belonging is an act of justice because it recognizes the systemic barriers and injustices that have led homelessness to being one of the main issues that many cities and states are not addressing. Belonging is an act of justice because it provides safety and stability and community, which are essential for human well-being and flourishing. Belonging is an act of justice because in a world full of hostile architecture, belonging is justice. Thank you. Oh, they wanted me to take questions. 5 minutes, yes.
Thank you, Dr. Lester, ABD.
ABD.
You're almost there.
I'm waiting on a defense date right now.
So I've been thinking a lot about our unhoused neighbors in the downtown of Atlanta. Last night, my husband and I went to Underground. The World Cup 2026 is coming soon.
Yes.
And Atlanta has a very interesting history of preparing for these big monumental moments by taking our unhoused neighbors, packing them up, shipping them to the suburbs like Clayton County, things like that. And so I'm just curious about what ideas you have, given all of the change and the energy that's happening in downtown Atlanta right now. What are you thinking about, and how can we prepare for these moments?
It's a great question. And to answer the question, I've looked at several different cities all around the country, doing policy analysis, with different laws, allowing hostile architecture to displace people. And one of the things that I've noticed is that there is more space than we give attention to. I think one of the ideas that any city, not just specific to Atlanta, because this is an issue that happens all around the country, is reinvestment in unique spaces for people who are unhoused. When I was doing research on the state of Tennessee, one of the things that I've noticed that is a trend across many cities that are large and flourishing and growing is that there are more people who are unhoused than there are beds available in space. And so we really have to think about how we reimagine some of the space that we have. And also, we need to reinvest in that space in a way that gives people access to somewhere to be stable. There are other cities around the country that are using housing first models with wraparound services that have been really, really prominent in helping people to actually escape homelessness. When we look at affordability too, most times we talk about we just have to create more affordable housing when, affordability is not affordable for those who have career jobs, right? There's a difference between affordability and low-income housing, and we need to reimagine how we're using excess space that is around the city to create that type of stability and space for those who are unhoused. There are a lot of trends right now around the country. My specific public policy interest is around laws that are created to exclude. And so we're seeing more laws than ever before criminalize what it means to be homeless. Like in the state of Colorado, they passed a law where you can't even live out your car. You'll get a ticket and fine. The city of South Carolina, Port Royal, South Carolina, has made it illegal. Missouri followed up Tennessee and made it, a misdemeanor to sleep outside. And so, we're starting to see these real violent trends violating the human rights. And as long as public policy is in place like this, it creates an iterative process where this social rhetoric produces these policies, and these policies creates this lens or social framing that people view the unhoused through. And then when people are viewing the unhoused through a lens of disdain, then we kind of push them away and push them aside. But what I'm arguing in my research is that we need to start with this idea of belonging. What sociologist Teresa Gowan missed in her chart was this idea of worth talk, because every public policy itself is communicating a narrative whether we think about it or not. And we need to think about ways in which we actually create laws to protect those without an address. And I said a lot, I'm sorry.
There are some communities that have dedicated areas for miniature housing.
Yes.
Are they successful? And if so, how can we continue that?
Yes. Dedicated houses that are on the outskirts of cities, which are largely underfunded. I've seen a number of faith-based communities leverage their parking lots and green spaces to create these sort of tent cities. And when people hear the words tent cities, you got to think there's 5 periods of homelessness. You got the vagrancy period. You got the poorhouse period. You got the deinstitutionalization period. You have the chronic period. You have all of these periods of homelessness, and there are 2 mass homelessness eras that happen in the United States of America. And encampments had always been a part of the fabric of the United States. And the reason I bring this up is because when homelessness first was coined, homelessness in the United States of America, it was mostly young men post-war who was working jobs and trying to support themselves working on the railroads. Homelessness didn't become criminalized until the 70s and 80s due to political rhetoric, the closing down of mental health institutions, and creating this narrative that those who are living on the streets are somehow to be seen as criminal. During the 80s is when the laws started to emerge and literally displace and attack those who are unhoused. And so when you bring up this point about creating spaces, I think we have to address the mentality that has been fashioned over the last 100 years as it relates to this population of people. And it starts with reframing the narrative. If more people had a better understanding of the history of homelessness, how this has evolved, the individual stories, deconstructing these false notions that people are either addicted to drugs or alcohol, we can begin to develop some type of empathetic approach where we open up community to care about the whole community. There's research that's showing right now that homelessness is going to increase by 45% by the end of 2024, just based upon what we went through in COVID. Think about that. And we're talking about new cases of homelessness. When we think about homelessness, homelessness is not just an issue that is just a few guys standing on the street corner. It's a global issue. It's over 150 million people in the United States, in the world that actually is experiencing homelessness. So to answer your question, I think we need to start with reframing how we actually view this population, which in turn would create more of an empathetic approach in creating more space for people to exist as they plan to transition out of the state of homelessness. Thank you.